Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Holmes, freelance culture critic for Religion Unplugged and podcast host of The Overthinkers. I am here to welcome you to the Religion Unplugged podcast, which is your regular plug-in for religion, news, and culture. We have with us today a very special guest. He is an actor, writer, and director who is the writer and director of the upcoming film Between Mercy and Me, which is going to be in theaters June 20th. We are so happy to have Mr. Craig Lamar Brown here. Mr. Brown, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, brother.
And we actually spoke before because he was on my the Overthinkers podcast. It was such a fun time. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Awesome.
Cool. So for people, this is your first this movie is your first feature film that you have directed and wrote. You starred in God's Fool before. Can you tell me first, how did you get started in making movies? Was this something you wanted to do since you were a kid, or what got you on this path?
Yeah, since a kid, I always had like an interest in movies. I just didn't really know like what it was or how to get. Yeah, how do they pull all this together? I know they have a camera, but everything else is like I had no clue. And I always had like an interest in acting, even as a little kid and storytelling in general. But there's like no outlets. I didn't have like a theater program at my high school, even though I love musicals, I love theater, I love just anything that help tell a story, and art, music. That have always been passions of mine. But not many outlets or training.
Right.
So I think this was about 4 years ago now. It's crazy. My day job was a software engineer, and I was working on a mobile streaming application for a producer in LA. He was working on a film, and he asked me to audition for like a really small role on the film. What's called that? The name of the movie was God's Fool. And as I auditioned, he liked it. He said, "Hey, do you just want to play the lead role?" I'm like, So, like 3 weeks later, fly to New York, then LA to film God's Fool, and that was my first time on screen. And yeah, I enjoyed it. And in the midst of it, I realized like, oh, I actually have a much deeper desire for creating, and just kind of where my brain was like naturally running as I was starting the film. I had like so many more ideas around production and like creative ideas, but I wouldn't express those out loud because
Sure.
I'm just
don't want to be a jerk. It's like, oh, like this is my first time on a film set. I know how you could do this better.
Yeah. And David Schultz is the person who
great guy.
Leo Schultz directed the film, and he's just he's really good at what he does. And
right.
It's like there's no way. But however, I still have all of these ideas of like, oh, like if we did this, it could make this better. And still me like trying to learn to act and fumbling here. I had some really good moments. I had some really awful moments. But after that experience, I loved it. I'm like, oh man, like this is really cool. And then there was like a gap of me acting in films because it was like I either you had to move to New York and LA, and I had at the time I had 3 kids, or 3 kids at the time. I have 5 now.
Okay, yeah. So well, you have more now than you did.
Yeah. With 3 kids and like doing the just uprooting life and moving to New York, LA, that just wasn't
not feasible.
Yeah, especially like I had a good career, made a decent amount of money to provide for the family. So it's like that isn't in the cards now. I
Right.
know I would have to take a big setback in order to pursue this full time. So I was like, no, and plus I just the passion for to
Yeah.
continue acting was not there.
Right.
I like it. I enjoy it.
It
If
doesn't quite meet the opportunity cost of everything else. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So, um, yeah. After that, the time of I, having the experience of starting my first ever feature film. I definitely keep things going. Um, and as mentioned, there was a gap, but then eventually I started thinking more like, maybe I can just start, writing, just
Hmm.
writing, and not, having it go anywhere. Just to do it, just to get it out of my system, right?
Yeah.
And 2020, the whole George Floyd thing happened, and I just looked at how the world responded to uh, what happened to him,
Yes. Yep.
him being killed. And there was just like a lot of like disconnect, especially within the church, around like how to talk about race in a healthy and productive way. And I'm like, man, like this is terrible. Like everyone's social media's feed was just on fire.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, and it was like if you're left leaning, you had your ideas of like what happened and why. If you're right leaning, you may have felt some way initially about the
Yep.
situation.
Yep.
And it's just like, oh my gosh, like this is terrible,
Yeah.
especially for like and the church. Just I feel like it was a really good time for the church to step in and be leaders,
Hmm.
but that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
I don't think the church was equipped. I don't think the
Yeah.
church, and I'd say the church, big C church, Christians,
Sure. 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 Yes. Yes. Yes.
people who
The
follow
the
Jesus.
corporate body of
Yeah,
Christ. Yes.
yeah. It's like guys, like we missed this. We picked sides. We picked left and we picked right,
Yeah.
and it didn't add anything
Yeah.
to fight like what was happening.
So let's talk about that. So the movie is a Christian social racial drama, and it called, as we said, Between Mercy and Me. So tell us, give the listeners a brief synopsis of the movie, and
Mhm.
continue your story talking about like why you were inspired to tell this story and tell the story this way. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, really, I just took from what I saw, like in culture, like right. Is I'm like, all right, well, here's what we have. We have the black community feeling um, misheard,
Hmm.
not represented in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a cry out of like, hey, like these things, not that they happen all the time, but they do happen, and there
Right.
needs to be some adjustment to it. And then you have, and I'm using these are very broad strokes,
Okay,
but
you're allowed to oversimplify. Yes.
for the sake of like communicate why the source. So and then I took the white community or the white evangelical church um response. Let's just say like more of a conservative approach and not wanting to deal with it. It was either like nobody wants to talk about race or like it is what it is. Have personal responsibility. So I took those two things. I'm like, all right, well, this is where we're at. We have anger and frustration on one side, and we have passivity on the other side. So how do we fix this? And so I took a black worship leader, and I took a white worship leader, two leaders in the church, to really like look at like perspective, right? Like that's I feel like in a lot of these conversations around race, like that's what we miss is perspective. If you don't have like good perspective of what it's like being a black male in the community, in a community, and having interactions with police. Like, of course, it won't connect with you. Like, why is this a big issue? And if you're not a white person who grew up in a family who may have had some, let's just say, maybe some parents who struggled with being loving and accepting to black people. Like, those are very real things, and that's okay. It's okay. But how
Sure,
do
sure,
we
sure.
get to a better place? So, like, just looking at like the complexities. Like, I'm a black man. And I grew up in inner city Detroit. Also, my best friend is white. My wife is white.
Hmm.
So I know both worlds very,
Yeah,
very well. And I wanted the story to mimic that, and especially like with music. Music is the one thing that I feel like, we as humanity in general can connect to. Like, there's so many, popular songs out there that we can all I know the lyrics to,
yeah, yeah.
no matter or understand the rhythm and beats, and I feel like that would be a crucial part of help carrying the story, because like nobody wants to sit down for an hour and a half and talk about uh, how you're slightly racist and that you need to be better. Like, that's a horror watch, right?
Yeah,
But
I mean, yeah, any social drama, regardless of the topic, is going to have
yeah.
that problem.
Mhm.
Let alone what about race?
Exactly. So yeah. So that that was kind of the motivator of the story, and like what's happening in between Mercy and me. Like, you'll see both sides, and both reactions of both sides, but
Sure.
also like how can we further the conversation instead of
Yeah.
just going around in
Going
circles.
around in circles all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So a couple things you mentioned, a couple things in there. So one of the things I would say I love best about your movie, watching it, was that nuance and that complexity that is reflected in your movie that is typically not reflected in other conversations basically on any topic whatsoever nowadays, particularly ones that get political. The protagonist is growing up like, with his father saying, oh, don't, like, relate to these people who are
Mhm.
in your community because, like, they're the gangsters and they're the part of the gang, and I knew his father, and he's not a good guy. And then of course he talks to the other person himself and is like, well, actually it's more complicated than that, because
Mhm.
part of the reason I'm in this place right now is because of how your father treated my father. And then of course
Mhm.
he talks to his father and he's like, well, it's actually more complicated than that. And
Mhm.
that kind of whiplash of like, oh, anytime I want to find a place to condemn somebody else in a simple way and simply turn them to be an enemy, you get you learn further. It's like, oh, it's more complicated
Yeah.
than that. The church had an opportunity during the George Floyd protests in
Mhm.
2020 to step in and offer a, let's say, an alternative model to having these conversations. And they didn't do that. And that's been a frustration I've known for a lot of people
Mhm.
in general in cultural, political matters, but particularly in woundedness around race and racial conversations. I know you're a storyteller. You're not a sociologist or such, but why do you think, at least reflected in your experience, the church has, at least, let's say, not been leading the way on this? Whether or not you think it's behind culture in other ways, why do you think it's not been able to use its resources? Because you would think it would have. Why do you think, or at least in your
Yeah.
experience, has this seemed to not been able to actualize that?
Yeah, that's a question of the decade, right?
Right. Yes.
Like, yeah, it's oh my gosh, yeah, there's so many complexities to it. Unfortunately, there shouldn't be that many complexities,
Yeah.
but like we do it. So it's, I think, largely American Christianity in general is just very, very easy, and it's
Hmm.
comfortable. It's
Hmm.
so easy and it's comfortable. Like, I mean, like, just think of like how easy it is for us to church shop right now. Like,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
this church fits what I need to hear. And there's
Hmm.
like and not that that's bad, but what happens is like you just lose diversity, and that's just what
Mm,
Christianity is. Like it, you know, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary."
mhm.
We're human, we're broken, therefore we're all weary, right? Like,
Yes. I'm
so
weary. I can say that. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So it's yeah. So I think comfort is a big issue of why
Hmm.
like it hasn't been tackled, because it's like we're so used to hearing like going to places where we hear what we want to hear, or we
Mm.
like this style of preaching and teaching. And no, sometimes, and it is what it is. I don't think you can get away with that, because
Sure,
like
sure.
there's communication in general is like important. Like I mean, some people, like let's say like if you grew up in a very Pentecostal black church,
Sure.
like you're used to some energy behind
Yeah.
preaching.
You're
You're used
not
to
gonna
shouting.
maybe
You're used to
you're not gonna maybe like vibe with sort of a more
yeah,
a more Anglican sort of stuffy church like I grew up in. So it's
yeah.
not it's yes.
Or and you flip that, think of a 6-year-old white Susan who loves her choir and serves faithfully and loves
Right.
Jesus, and like that will be kind of culture shocking for her. So it's
Right.
like there
Yes.
there's no way of getting away with that. But I think and I think just the makeup of our country,
Yeah.
like what religion is, and that's like that's a
Right.
much
Right.
broader, high level God come
Sure.
back to
Sure.
you all conversation. But like I think at the front, like that is the problem. The church is divided, and I use this word. I'm, I'm not saying it in a very negatively aggressive way, but is church right now in America is divided in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Uh,
If I understand what you're saying correctly, it's like, yeah, you have the church is not able to have these conversations because these conversations are, again, not using this in the inflammatory sense, but segregated by communities. And those
yeah,
communities are having their own conversations.
it-
A-
yeah,
And the problem is, again, people have talked about this. There's an article in the Atlantic that's talked about, the um family estrangement. That's because where people are becoming more and more sensitive to differences of opinion with their families, such that smaller and smaller slights are are reason to not talk to each other anymore.
yeah,
And it's like, because they're talking about the fact that, it's like, why is it we have more family estrangement now than we used to, even though families aren't
oh
more
yeah,
abusive than they used to be? It's like,
right.
it's not, we're not saying that there aren't abusive families, but the level of estrangement versus abuse is
Oh my gosh.
not makes sense.
Absolutely.
And then of course you talk about this in the film industry. Like, again, we're both a part of these both worlds as Christians filmmakers. They talk about this in the film industry, that the film industry in some of the most is one of the most racially segregated industries that there is. And part of the reason is because in other industries, it's much more like, okay, we're looking for somebody who can do the job.
Mhm.
Whereas in the film industry, we're looking for somebody who we can do the job and we vibe with. And unfortunately, you vibe with people who have had similar upbringings to you, who've
Yeah,
been, are same kind of culture as you. And because of our history of both benign and less benign segregation in this country, there just is such that cultural divide
yeah.
in between churches as well, of
Mhm.
people who vibe with each other. And there hasn't been the effort put in, um, or at least the effort has not had the results we'd like to have to overcome that, so we're all having the same conversation. Is that an accurate way of
Yeah,
summarizing what you're saying?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's yeah, dead on. And I think there will be a time where like and that's kind of hope with this movie, right? That it will
Yeah.
encourage like healthy conversations around like racial unity and like how we can, all not just like do our part, but like how we can really like lock arms and like work together. And yeah, but yeah, it's and again, I think it's hard to get away from like again, like you said, really it's relating to someone else
Yeah.
of
Yes.
why we had the segregation. But I think a lot of this is honestly on church leaders, pastors,
Hmm.
and I think that's part of the reason why uh, you know scripture is really heavy on like if you want to preach, you want to pastor, like you need to have your stuff together.
Hmm.
This isn't easy. This isn't, and I think a lot of leaders have taken this seat to comfort,
Hmm.
fame, and unfortunately, like wealth. Like
Sure. Yeah.
it's like you have these things mixing. So it's like why preach a sermon to a congregation full of mostly white conservatives who tithe faithfully about race?
Hmm.
Or why teach a sermon to a black conversation who most maybe have those liberal
Sure.
Texas liberal views to say, hey guys, we really need to not demonize
Hmm.
all white people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or we need to be more loving, we need to be more aggressive about like we need to be patient when
Yeah.
we're receiving
Sure.
racism. So it's like you say that people are like it's challenging, and you preach that message 3 or 4 times, like you each week
You're
you
probably gonna
lose
lose some people.
more tithers. And
Yeah.
so it's so
Well, that's
there's yeah.
so that's one of the things. I mean, you do in the movies. You actually are probably the hardest, and I don't mean that in a bad way, on the pastors in your movie. If you could pick like people who are you hold you give the most flack to, and that makes sense. It's like, okay, you guys have congregations, and you have people call them out. So you guys have congregations, and you're not putting the effort in to overcome this segregation. We're not saying you guys maybe are racist yourselves, or that it's anybody who's alive now's fault that this is happening, but there is a problem and you guys are not putting the work in to solve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And it's and again, like again, I get it. Being if I were a leader of a church, and that would be tough
Sure.
uh
Yeah.
for me, which is why I'm not, pastoring.
Yes. No, that's fair. That's fair. Now, so okay, so I was to say, what was the hardest thing about making this movie, and what was the most fun thing about making this movie?
This was hard to write because like I had to get it right. Like I had
Mm,
to make sure that it did what it needed to do in regards to moving the viewer. I need to make sure that
yep.
the characters in the story were relatable, and also like having to make sure that like it was balanced as well,
Hmm.
because if if I spend an hour and a half like going in on like, hey, black people, we just need to be more patient uh
Hmm.
with our white brothers and sisters, uh I would lose all the black audience. I would
Hmm.
black
Yeah.
Twitter would
Yeah. Yeah.
and if I were right the same way for white people, everyone's ultra pro Trump and
Mhm,
MAGA
go.
country and conservatives. Like, if I replace that brush, it's like I would lose everyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like yeah, so I had a lot of sleepless nights about like. So yeah, it was hard. It was a balancing act, and again, like I needed to make sure that I delivered and on you know balancing it and being truthful
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
it was extremely difficult, and making a movie in general is just
Oh yeah.
it's like impossible, like
Yeah.
almost impossible.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah. So that was really tricky.
Yeah.
to-
And so
I
what was
think we
most
did it. I think we did
yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, no, I mean you put a movie together was that was graceful and honest, and that's very difficult to do. Um what was maybe the most fun thing about making the movie?
The music
Hmm.
part of it was just overall just every yeah that it was really fun. I mean, I didn't write the music, I inspired it all, is what I
Sure.
tell people. Like, I don't
Yeah, 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 yeah.
like, I didn't write it, but I inspired it. Yeah, so it was just really let's talk about favorite part of it, because it's like, okay, like, all right, we got the story now, like, let's tell another story with the music. And
Hmm.
like one of the songs that we just released called Lost Without You.
Hmm.
Uh some of the lyrics, it's like, I'm growing weary in the desert. These days are drought for my soul. A promised land, I'm trying to find it. Only you know where to go. And I'm feeling like
Hmm.
Moses, leading your people. I need a pillar by day and a fire by night. And it's just talking about like how he's feeling like he's a desert land. He's trying to encourage
Hmm.
community. Then on another side, he's still a black male, and you know,
Yeah.
who still experiences you know uh racism, and
Hmm.
watching the neighborhood get gentrified. And so it's
Yeah.
like, so just having being able to bring music and put it to like that story was really fun. But also like the collaboration of like everyone within the film. Everyone was sold out for it. We didn't
Hmm.
have millions of dollars to make it, but people were bought in and knew that we had something that could be great.
Yeah.
So just watching, and that was a dream. That was probably my favorite part. That's how I envisioned it. I mean, like, I was hopefully optimistic that it will turn out that way, and
Yeah.
it did. And it did. I was really blessed by like everyone's input to the film. So yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Now, have you felt like, because we are talking about how you're not feeling like the church has had these conversations well, and as part of what you're doing with this movie is trying to help give a model for having the conversation differently, um that both white Christians and black Christians, to do another oversimplification,
Yeah.
can get on board with, at least say, yes, I feel represented enough in this conversation that I can enter into it.
Yeah.
um what have you um had experiences in your own life where you've been able to have these conversations with people to the degree that you have felt like um uh you've been able to experience that kind of progress being made, um and what and or is this kind of aspirational, like you're putting this on the screen because you haven't had this in
Yeah.
your life and you're hoping it will be? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah. From my like perspective, it's like, I'm an open book, and I'm pretty gracious in general in my conversations. And like, there's a lot of things I lean heavily right on,
Sure, sure.
as a Christian. There's a lot of social things, fiscal things as well, where on paper I maybe look more
Sure.
conservative, but also like I grew up in the inner city of Detroit. So like
Right, right, yeah.
so like so it's honestly, it's just it's really easy for me to enter into conversations with someone who's like struggling to understand why people are so upset
Hmm.
about a death uh, of a black male in
Right.
whatever city,
Right, right, right.
or
Because you have
why.
that context. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, I can explain, and because of like that context is super helpful. So yeah, I mean, these conversations definitely come up um, for me often, and I'm happy to engage them. So it's
Mm. Do you ever feel, because there is an argument that is often made in these conversations, particularly people in the sort of the anti-racist sort of side of the Black community and the conversations around this, that that's sort of an unfair burden to place on people of color to be the patient ones and to
Mhm.
be the gracious ones in the conversation, of always having to be the one to step up and explain the experience of
Yeah,
people of color. And even to your conversation, your movie, you're saying, okay, I want to have both sides represented fairly equally while still being honest. It's like, the response is, okay, but the conversation isn't equally, people, we aren't equally wrong or
yeah,
equally right. and, and so
yeah,
that itself is sort of a lie. But you've talked a few times about how that's something that you feel is, that at least, very least, you're called to do and the church is called to do, to take on that burden of being patient and such. And
yeah,
then also that was something you wanted to do with the movie. So can
yeah,
you explain to somebody who's kind of skeptical about that,
yeah.
why you feel that that's the right thing to do?
So that's yeah, that's a incredible question. So
Thank you.
yeah, so balance. All right. So with the movie, again, I wanted to present it with truth and grace, but also like if I'm going to talk about race, I want to make sure that like again, both sides here are shortcomings,
Right.
right? Like the gospel is an equal opportunity offender, like like it goes in on like humans in general, right?
Yeah.
So that's from a bar perspective. However, I don't think it's a secret that the movie is called Between Mercy and Me. And the reason it's called Between Mercy and Me because it's from the perspective of Hugo.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's like and it's shaped as a white audience coming into a black man's world,
Mhm.
but still like, again, like so we talk about balance, right? Yeah, like there is this no matter what like Christ let's look at Martin Luther King. I think he's a
Yeah. Yeah.
great example for this, right? um he was very gracious and patient because he knew that in order to further his agenda
Mhm.
that violence and anger and outrage just wasn't going to get it done. I think
Yeah.
there's a time for outrage. I think there's a
Sure.
time for anger. But like you look at Martin Luther King, like if he would have just been let's call him Malcolm X 2.0, like
Yeah.
if he would have gone that route, or if he would have tried to toe the line,
Mhm.
um, like he would have missed, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you're in a relationship with someone, like you do something terrible to offend that person,
Mhm.
and you come back and you ask for forgiveness. Um, whose responsibility is that on now? The person who's
Hmm.
been offended. Um,
Hmm.
so it's so weird that like yeah, like we have as a black person is like yeah I can point out all day like of the ways I've experienced racism or I look at my people in general.
Yeah.
You just go back in history, like oh okay, like my great grandfather was a slave.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
so it's like I can gather that data all day, right? At the end of the day, like what's gonna really win someone over is love. Like
Hmm.
loving someone in the midst of, let's say, if someone just calls me the N word, go back to Africa, blah blah blah, and my response is, I hate that you feel that way. I love you, and Jesus loves you,
Hmm.
and I pray that one day you will experience like the weight of His love.
Hmm.
Or if You call me what? Pow! Boom. Like I can do that. I want to do that sometimes. But like is where is that getting us? So yes, like I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, like it is kind of unfair. It is unfair that there's like this weight of like patience and grace and like yeah, like it's true. There's some truth to that. Like that responsibility. So some of it should be on white leaders, and
Hmm.
it's like it's so we can only lead the racism like the unity charge so much.
That's right.
At some point, like we need to see well respected white leaders say in the church specifically say like guys, we're not doing enough.
Hmm.
We need to be an example.
Hmm.
And I think that is what would definitely um, you know, help progress
Right.
race unity within the church.
You talked about the fact that's like, yeah, you've made it love is more effective at changing someone than is just yelling at them. And so even if maybe you have the right to be, you know,
Mhm,
um, angry and condemning at someone,
mhm.
that doesn't move the needle in the way. Actually, hearing what someone has to say and letting them feel heard, um, even if it doesn't end up being that we have share equal responsibility to change, at the very least making sure that everything that they have to say is still heard,
Yeah.
and before you then say, okay, now it's time for you to hear my side of the
Mhm.
story, is a more effective way of getting there. And I've had what was it, I was having a conversation with Dr. George Yancey recently, who's um, written the book Beyond Racial Division, and he talked about that. um,
Oh,
if you
okay.
if you haven't read that book, it's a short book, but it's really incredible. He's a
Okay.
Christian sociologist, and he talks about sort of the loop
Oh
between anti-racism and color blindness that just never goes anywhere, and how the
yeah. Yeah.
the model of mutual accountability, as he puts it,
Yeah.
is sort of way forward. So you would really resonate with a lot of the book if you haven't read
Okay.
it. But
Yeah. Yeah. I'm checking it out.
but regardless, what are you hoping, I guess, say, if you could say briefly, from this movie that people will take away from this movie, and that they will be able to take with them as action steps to make um to go forward in their own lives for racial conversations? Yeah, I guess say that for our audience before we head out.
Yeah. The hope of this film is that uh, again, just more honest conversations will come up. Like
Hmm.
as much as I wanted to be, fix all movie, like, and you're like, oh my gosh, and it was beautiful. Like, I love you.
Yes.
Let's change, like
Yeah,
our
yeah.
minds, our hearts forever. Like, that's not reality. But like the hope is that um, you could just go another step further wherever you're at. I
Mhm.
don't think it can't be like a one size like action step for everyone. It could be a small one for
Mhm.
someone. It could be like, you know what? I am gonna hold the door open for someone
Hmm. Hmm.
or who's black. I'm gonna go out of my way to serve someone who's black or to have a conversation. That could be a big step for a lot of people, or a step for someone. Another step for someone could be a you know a a white father allowing his white daughter
Hmm.
to date a black man. Like
Hmm. Yeah.
um, that could be a step. Vice versa. So
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. Like there's
No,
um
sorry, go ahead.
yeah. I was just saying like there's a lot of ways like people can come and watch this movie and go. So the way we set it up is for this movie to be uh, viewed with large groups.
Hmm.
And that's kind of how I wrote it too,
Sure,
for it
yeah.
something to be that you can interact with a lot of people. That way you're experiencing all the same emotions and feelings.
Yeah.
You're watching the same thing at the same time. And you can, you know, um, have, conversations after the movie. So
Yeah.
yeah, but that's my hope is that, that a next step will come. What?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is for you, but yeah, like that's kind of my
No,
hope.
that makes sense. I mean, if the problem that you laid out at the beginning is that we don't have the same solutions because we're not part of the same conversation, if this movie can help move the needle so that we're having more of the same conversation, then that will be doing a great thing. And
Yeah.
that's what I see from this movie, and that's what I'm really excited about it for people to see.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, this is before planning. Do you have other movie projects and ideas that you would like to put together? If this movie is, one of my film mentors said that, having a successful movie means you get to play again. So if you get to play again, do you have other ideas for movies that you would like to do, or was this sort of a one-off for you?
No, I'm definitely I'm still writing, still creating, and the ball is definitely rolling on um like some bigger budget things.
Hmm.
I just gotta get my investors their money back on this one.
That's always the way.
They're on board. Movies, movies cost so much money.
They really do.
Like, yeah. So yeah, I definitely want to continue down this road. I feel a calling. Mental health is something that I'm
Hmm.
exploring next. um, I got some great ideas around it. See if I can pull it off.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, I
Cool.
get planned. So if anyone's interested in being a
Well,
part,
everybody should go see Between Mercy and Me, both in order to advance the conversations around race that we're having in this country, whether you're secular or Christian, and then also to see if Craig Lamar Brown, Mr. Craig Lamar Brown, if you like his filmmaking style, so that you can invest money in his next project, which is something that we very much endorse here. So yes, if people want to see the movie and get in touch with you and support you in any way, where would you direct them?
yeah, so you can reach me at Craig Lamar Brown or Instagram. Website is brownbrownfilms.com. You can sign up for a newsletter. I need to get a better contact form, but yeah, like you just right now, just sign up for a newsletter. Just send me your email and I'll respond. But yeah, like you can literally DM me and Instagram and I'll respond. I won't have a blue check.
Yeah, yeah. You're not so big yet that you don't don't have
Yeah.
time to respond to people. Yes, yes.
2 million followers from now, guys. Like,
Exactly. You have to talk to my secretary. Yes, exactly. Yes.
cool.
Fantastic. And the movie comes out June 20th, and
Yes.
it's a Fathom event. How long is it could be in theaters? Is it like one day?
One day.
Okay.
Yeah, one day. So don't miss it. It's again with the amount of music that's in this film, like you're gonna want to see this in surround sound to get the feel. Like it's been specifically crafted for to be experienced in the theater. So
Nice.
yes.
And
So
everybody's going to be saying it at the same time, so you're going to get to have have the full experience, and to cap off your Juneteenth
yes.
celebration. So all right, well, thank you so much, Mr. Craig Brown. This has been a fantastic interview, and definitely be praying for your film. And yes, and thank you everybody else so much for joining us today, and come back next time for your regular religion plug-in.